Hello everyone, this is Megan Varick and I'm here to do a mini flip lesson on how to set up a graph for a column graph for STEM. So the first thing that you want to do is actually open a sheet in Google Sheets, and please make sure you actually name your sheet so that you can find it later. So for this demonstration, I'm going to call this column graph examples. However, you would want to name it something that's more appropriate for your project. As discussed in another flipped lesson, you need to make a determination of what type makes the most sense for you. What you'll notice is we have a lot of different options up here, and we're going to be using some of them as well as some formatting stuff. But once you name your sheet, the next thing I really recommend doing is actually renaming the tabs at the bottom. And these become super helpful for when you need to manipulate data. So what I always recommend is that you have a sheet, and we're going to rename this sheet raw data, and yours can match mine exactly. Please pay attention to any casing or spaces that you use because we are going to refer to this and we're going to need to make sure it matches in later. So once I have this set up, if I'm making a column graph, I will probably most likely need 3 columns to use. One column I can call trial, and then I'm going to use one of the examples I had in the previous mini lesson, and I'm going to use a column that is my design feature. So I'm going to type that up here. And then lastly, that's going to be kind of my independent variable, the thing that I'm going to be changing. And then the dependent variable, the thing that I'm going to be measuring or counting, is going to be for this instance pressure until first crack. And what you want to make sure that you do is you include the units up here. You can only put numbers in sheets. So if you do something like 34 psi, when you go to actually graph it, it's going to give you an error because it's going to recognize that as a text field opposed to a number. So if you put the units up here, not only does it help you remember what you're doing, but it'll also set it up when you're doing the graph. So I know for my students, I'm giving you some sample data. So this would be a time to go ahead, pause the video, and add in your sample data. And then when you're ready, resume the video. I'm going to spend some time right now typing in these values. So at this point, you can see that I filled in my trial column, I filled in my design feature column, and I filled in my pressure until first crack column. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to add another tab at the bottom. So you can see there's a plus icon in the bottom left that says add sheet. And when it does so, it's going to make a new blank sheet for me. What I recommend is not to actually manipulate this raw data tab, because as you're typing in things, you don't want to erase them. This becomes a reference point. So where we're actually going to be manipulating the data and where we're going to be making the graph here is going to be in a completely separate tab, and we're going to call from that. So let's go ahead, just as we did before, we're going to rename this. So you can either right click, or if you're in a Chromebook, you would press with 2 fingers and you're going to see your rename. And I'm going to rename this one figure 1, and then I would add a description of whatever is appropriate for your data. So I'm going to call this concrete additives. This does not have to be the full name of your figure, but it just helps you in case you have multiple figures that you're trying to make, that you can quickly grab and reference them. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go ahead and tell Sheets to pull values from the raw data tab or whatever yours is named. So not only can you type in letters and figures, but you can also do mathematical values. So if we type in an equals here, what this will do is this will automatically tell Sheets that it needs to start to do some sort of either calculation or reference. So what we are going to do is we are going to type in raw data or whatever you named your specific sheet. And what we are going to do is we are actually going to encapsulate that in single quotes, and that tells us we're referencing it. And with Sheets, you need to put an exclamation point down. I know this formatting looks weird, but we're basically saying, I want to pull from this sheet called raw data, and I need it to look exactly the same. And what we're going to do is we are going to use A1 as the reference. And what that will do is that'll pull the value trial. And we can see that here if I go to my raw data tab and I look at cell A1 and I bring those across, I see trial. So what you can do is you can do the exact same thing over and over again, equals raw data in single quotes, exclamation point A2, and you can see it highlights yellow to show you that you're referencing another one, and I can keep doing that over and over. What's a lot easier is if you click on the cell in the bottom right hand corner, you can see there's a feature where you can go ahead and actually drag and drop, and it will put this all the way down. You'll notice I dragged farther than I needed to, only because I might be adding future trials. So if I add a future trial, say I go into trial 11, and that is a microfilaments setup, and the pressure until first crack is 2500 even, why not? If I then go to this tab, you can see that that value automatically gets updated. So what I'd like you to do right now is actually to pause the video, and whether you choose to do the click and drag as I just showed you, or whether you want to type them in, can you set up the remaining columns? Just be clear here, if you want to type it in, you would reference not A1, but B1 because we're now in that column. Okay, so at this point you should have something in figure 1 that looks exactly like what you have in your raw data tab. And I know that seems silly, but it's better just to kind of manipulate the data this way so that we're not ever touching our raw data. You can kind of think about it, it's like the non-duplicated pages in your lab notebook. Those are kind of a permanent reference copy. So let's go to the figure 1 tab, and what we're going to do is, instead of trying to actually look at all of these values, because what we're most likely interested in is the average of these values, we're going to calculate out the average and standard deviation. So I like to give myself an empty column just as a visual break. So I'm going to go over here to my cell, which is F1, and I'm going to type in the different design feature categories I have. So for my particular example, that's going to be microfilaments. That's going to be macrofilaments. And notice I'm dedicating each column as its own separate one. And that's going to be my combination. I want to be able to graph two things. One, most importantly, I want to be able to graph the average of my data, but it's also good to see the standard deviation. And what their standard deviation will show you is how much variance or how different your individual data points look. So I could do this one of two ways. Right? I could go ahead and look at my calculator, and I could pull up all the ones that say microfilaments, and I could type them in. But again, it's much easier if we let Google Sheets do the work for us. So this is also going to be a calculation, and we're going to do equals average, and that tells the computer that we're going to be calculating an average. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. I think one of them might be easier if you're not really comfortable with computer syntax and code, but I think it requires more work. The second one I'm going to show you is going to be a little bit more initially typing, but the nice thing about it is every single time you update your data, it will automatically recalculate the average. So the first way would be if you wanted to kind of calculate the average by yourself every time, you would type in the word average, and we put a parenthesis, just like in math class, we're trying to separate our values, and you're actually going to hold down the control key on your keyboard. And you would find anything that is a microfilament, and we're looking at this column. So I'm going to click this one, and you can see it's highlighted in yellow, and then also here you can see it says C2, because that's referencing the cell. I can see that C3 is also a microfilament. And I can see cell C5 is a microfilament, and I can see this new one I created, C12 is a microfilament. So once I type those four in, I need to close my parenthesis, and I can hit enter. That absolutely works, and I can do the exact same thing for the macrofilaments, and I can do the same thing for the combination. So if you like that method, I encourage you right now to pause the video, do it that way, and then resume it. But I'm going to show you a different option. So I'm going to highlight my cell again, and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to hit equals, which makes sense because I'm still going to be doing a calculation. And I'm going to type in, instead of just average, I'm going to do average if. And what this does is it tells the computer, hey, I only want to take an average for certain cells within my parameters. So we're still going to use a parenthesis. And you can see the nice thing about Google Sheets is it does, every time you try to do a calculation that it recognizes, it gives you the formula, and it also gives you the syntax of how you want to set this up. So it's telling me the next thing I need to type in is my criteria range. And my criteria range is going to be all of column B. And so what I need to do in Excel or Sheets is I'm actually going to, instead of trying to highlight all cajillion cells in column B, I'm going to do a $, which locks it down to column B. And since I want the entirety of column B, I'm going to do a colon, and I'm going to do that exact same thing, $B to $B. And you can see once I've typed that in, the entire column is now highlighted. So it's saying we're going to skim through this column, and we're going to look at these particular words. So then I'm going to hit a comma, and then I'm going to look for my criterion. My criterion here is going to be a word. So I'm actually going to put this in double quotes because this is something called a string, and I need it to match. So I have to be really careful about what I type here. I have to type in microfilaments, and I need to make sure that it's capitalized, and I need to make sure it's plural. Because if I just type microfilament, notice that doesn't match what I've typed over here. Once I do that, then I'm going to say, okay, I'm looking at column B. I found the word microfilament. Now what? And I want it to take the average, not of column B, because that would be my actual words, but I want the values in column C. So what I'm going to do ahead is I'm going to say, okay, if there's a cell that's in microfilaments, what I want it to do is I want to take the value that is in column C, referring to that spot. So I'm going to do the $C, $C, and I'm going to close my parenthesis. So you can see here it's color coding, so it's showing me if I'm looking at B and I see the word microfilament, anything that's kind of attached to that, I'm going to go ahead and average that out. So when I hit enter after I close my parenthesis, it gives me the exact same value that I saw before. Again, though, the reason that I like this is if I go to my raw data tab and I come back over here and I add trial 12 and I add in microfilaments, and I can't spell, sorry, and I add in microfilaments and I get 2515, what will happen by doing it this way is you can see the average has already changed. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is to pause the video and try to take the average over for the other category or categories that I've provided you, and then resume the video when you're ready. So at this point, I have not only my data, I have calculated the averages out, and we're going to do the same thing for the standard deviation. So in order to do that, it's going to be another calculation. So I'm going to hit the equal sign. That's telling the computer that I need to do some math. And then I'm going to head and type in my formula. So for this one, it's going to be STDEV, which is shorthand for standard deviation. And we are going to do STDEVP because this is our entire population that we're looking at here. And you can see once I do that, once again, it's giving me some nice information on how to set this up. But what I want to do is I want to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to give you two options. So again, if you'd rather use down and hold down control, you can go ahead and find your values that would be a microfilament. I'm going to grab this one. I'm going to keep holding down control. That would be this one. I'm going to keep holding down control, this one, and this one. And I'm going to close my parenthesis. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to give me a value. However, if you want to do it the other way, then I'm going to show you how to do that. But if you'd like to try the first, pause now, get your values, and then resume the lesson. If you would like to do it the other way, we're going to do the same exact thing, STDEV, so standard deviation of the population, but there is no standard deviation if, as we saw with the average if, so we're going to have to do something called a filter. So we're going to type the word filter in lowercase, and what we're going to say is kind of the same thing. We're going to skim through the data and only pull out what's relevant to us. So in order to do this, we need to add another parenthesis, and now you can see it's giving me the syntax that I need in order to filter. Well, what I'm going to be doing this time is I'm going to be filtering values in column C, which is where my pressure until first crack is. So I'm going to do $C, $C, and then that's the range I'm looking at. And then we're going to do the condition. And what we're going to be looking at for this is the condition is going to have to refer to my column B. So I'm going to do $B, $B. And what I need to do now is I need to set it to a certain value. And I want this value to be, for this particular cell, microfilaments. So I'm going to put a quote in, because that double quote's telling me it's my string, and I'm looking for the word microfilaments, and I'm going to use a quote to encapsulate that. And then I need to make sure I put down not just one parenthesis, because that would close my filter statement, but I need a second one for the standard deviation of the population. So you can see that there. So please pause this and then fill in the other two standard deviations, and then we will be finally ready to actually graph. So now I have everything set up here. You'll notice that automatically what happens when these are calculated is they give you a certain number of decimals, basically as many as they can calculate, but most likely we would want to change that. So there's a couple of ways you can go about doing it. If you look here where there's this drop down arrow with more formats, you can set it up as a number. You can also see down here there's some options for either 2 or 1 decimal point or no decimal points, and there's even more formats where you can do a custom number format. If you have a set number that you're looking at, another thing that you can do is you can come over here and this will decrease, as it says, the decimal places. So I can just keep clicking that if that's more convenient.